Let's open with a word of prayer. Dear loving God, we thank you for the privilege of being able to gather together to study your word together. We ask that you would help us to take our minds off our earthly cares of the week's events that perhaps might seek to distract us, that you would help us to sit with you in heavenly places, to learn at your feet and to refresh our minds of the truths that you have taught us. We pray that you would settle us into the truth and help us to love one another as you love us. Please pour your Holy Spirit out upon us now, we plead in Jesus' name. Amen. So a few weeks ago, we started talking about Revelation 17, and I think it might be good to finish that. I don't know if we finish it, but carry on talking about that. So before we go to Revelation 17, I suppose, well, actually, we could go there just to recap briefly what we did last time. I think we covered the first few verses. So we talked about Revelation 17, and we talked about the angel that has come to John and has one of the 7 vials. So we talked about that, and we talked about how judgment comes on the whore, and that's what it says, I will show thee the judgment of the great whore that is upon many waters. This is Revelation 17 verse 1. So we had discussed the 7 angels and how these 7 angels have the plagues from chapter 16, and we were saying which angel, because it says there came one of these angels with a vial to talk to John, and we're thinking which one it was, but because it's talking about judgment of the great whore, we did reflect that some of the plagues, especially the 5, 6, you could say, and 7, come on the whore. So it could be the 5th, 6th, or 7th angel. We weren't still sure. And then we talked about the kings of the earth committing fornication and how this is an unlawful relationship, and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine. So we talked a bit about wine being doctrine and this false information, I suppose, or false doctrine that the world is drunk on. And then we placed John in the wilderness. Well, it says he carried me, the Spirit carried John away in the wilderness, verse 3. And this is when John sees this scarlet-coloured beast with a woman sitting on, full of the names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And we discussed the woman being a pure church in Scripture, but also an apostate woman being an apostate church, and saw that the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet and decked with gold and precious stones, having a cup of abominations of filthiness of her fornication. So she's got this cup of wine, false doctrine, we think, well, blood as well. We talked about that a bit.
But we say if we make an application, we say that's angel 7, 7th angel. It's talking about the end of the world.
So Natalie's asking if we make application that 7th angel, it's talking about
7th angel.
Is it the 7th angel at the end of the world? You mean the 7th plague angel? Which angel?
Became one of the 7 angels which had 7 vials, yeah.
So we're saying it's one of the 7 angels that had the 7 vials.
So we're saying it's the 7th angel that had the 7 vials.
We know it's one of the 7. We weren't sure which one it was because 5 judges puts darkness on the beast, and this angel is talking about judgment of the great whore. So we were trying to link it that way and saying, is it the angel that has the plague that's poured on the beast that comes to tell John, or is it the 7th angel that comes, because it just says one of the 7, which is so it doesn't really specify which angel, but we know it's one of these plague angels. So it's bringing judgment, and it's talking about judgment of the whore specifically in this chapter. So we know that the judgment of the whore is happening at the end of the world, but from the context later on. So it is talking about the end of the world. It's one of the 7. I don't know if we can go further than that. The 7th, the last one. What's your logic for that? Prove your point. So the 7th one, actually, when we looked at it last time, the 7th one's pouring out hail on, is that on the world, or is it on where is the hail? There was a great earthquake. I remember Richard asking about, well, we saw thunder, lightnings, and earthquake, and that's symbol of the voice of God in a way, or judgment. We know that we see that symbol at several places in the Bible. We see it at Mount Sinai, but we see it when the Ark of the Covenant is opened in heaven. The great city is divided. Babylon comes in remembrance before God. Every island falls away, and there fell upon people a great hail out of heaven. So that's not specifically on Babylon itself. People blasphemed because of the plague of the hail.
Not at the end of very end of the end, so it would be the last.
Yeah, that's the last plague. That's the last
Which
plague of
would
the seventh.
Makes sense to be the last angel, seventh angel.
So can you hear Natalie?
Sorry, I forgot.
Vaguely.
Vaguely. Yeah, speak up if you want to speak.
I'm forgetting we're actually recording. Sorry.
We're actually recording. Yeah, I feel like I have to repeat what you're saying. Speak up. So yeah, I think she's saying it makes sense. It's the seventh angel because it's bringing that judgment
On the world.
and now it's bringing judgment on the whore. But I suppose the fifth angel, you see, the sixth angel pours out its vial on the great river Euphrates, which is related to Babylon.
You love the fifth and the seventh.
I love the fifth and the seventh, yeah. And the fifth, well, it marks from the fifth, it starts putting judgment on because the others, and we do see that often, that 4-3 split. So there's the 4 and then there's the 3, isn't there? So that is a pattern. And these 5th, 6th, 7th are all on, you could say, related to judging Babylon, because the 5th one is in verse 10 and it says, poured out his vial upon the seat of the beast, and the kingdom was full of darkness. So I think those 3 symbolize the last phase. So it could be the 5th, but it's the same as the 7th, maybe you could say. So does it matter which angel? It's the 7th. Let's make it the 7th if you want. So it's judgment. And we see the 5th, 7th pattern in Revelation 17 as well, which is, yeah. So we talked about purple and scarlet being colours of the papacy specifically, but also sort of priestly colours and kingly colours. So there's this king-priest relationship, which I think is probably done on the deeper level. And the gold and precious stones, there's riches there. Gold is a symbol of Babylon, you know, from Daniel 2. Golden cup in a handful of abominations of fornication.
Verse 10.
Speak up, yeah. Question about verse 10 in chapter 16 or 17? 17.
10. So 5R.
Oh, we've not got there yet. Hold that thought.
Okay.
No, we haven't got to verse 10.
I'm just 10. You're in 16.
I'm in. I was in 16 when I said 10. Yeah, that was the plagues. So we've gone back to 17, and we're looking at purple, scarlet in verse 4, and the gold. And we talked about purple and scarlet being symbols of the papacy, colours of the papacy. It's the cardinals, the bishops, and the priests. And so, and a purple is a symbol of kingship, and we looked at some verses about that last time. So there's this priest king. So it's a false high priest as well. We talked about the high priest's forehead, and on the forehead in verse 5 we see mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. So we see that this label on the forehead, and the priest had holiness unto the Lord in the Old Testament. So it's a counterfeit religion, counterfeit doctrine, and we had said that mystery Babylon, and it's a mystery. So there's something confusion. We know Babylon means confusion as well. We talked about that, and it's a mystery to people. So there's this idea of deception to me. There's a mystery when you don't know what's going on really. You say something's a mystery working in the background. Natalie said, yeah. And we pinpointed this woman in the wilderness, that this time period of this beast, this woman sitting on these waters and on this scarlet coloured beast, is at the end of the wilderness time period, because this woman is drunk with the blood of the saints, tells us in verse 6, and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And John wonders with great admiration, and this similar language to Revelation 13. So I think we got to there, verse 7. So we'll pick it up there. But before we do that, I want you to read a quote from Desire of Ages, just going over the wine and the doctrine. So this is Desire of Ages. Okay, I'll just put it here for now. Desire of Ages 279.3 and 280.1. So this is the link with this is that we're talking about this woman who has this cup of abominations, the wine of the wrath of the fornication. So this is a cup of wine, and Christ in this passage, it's talking about Jesus talking about wine and doctrine. And I just thought we could read this as a bit of a commentary on that, what that means. And let me just put that in the chat. So, you know, if somebody wants to read that one, 279.3. If you want to speak up loud.
Yeah. Jesus pointed out the power of false teaching to destroy the appreciation, desire for truth. No man, Jesus said, having drunk old wine, straightway desireth new. For Jesus saith, the old is better. All the truth that has been given to the world through patriarchs and prophets shone out in new beauty in the words of Christ. But the scribes and the Pharisees had no desire for the precious new wine, Until emptied of the old traditions, customs, and practices, they had no place in mind or heart for the teachings of Christ. They clung to the dead forms and turned away from the living truth and the power of God.
So, any thoughts on that? Want to comment? Was it hard to read it and comment?
That first bit there, Jesus pointed out the power of false teachings to destroy the appreciation and desire for truth. I don't get that. To destroy the appreciation and desire for truth.
So this parable is where Jesus is talking about the old wineskin and putting new wine into it, and how they had to change to a new skin to put new wine in. Is this? I think he's talking about this transition they have to make, and Christ is pointing out the power of false teaching or the old ways to destroy the appreciation and desire for truth. Because if you put new truth into an old, someone that follows old ways, it's going to bust the skin.
Yeah.
And so then he made this comment: no person, Christ says, having drunk old wine, straight away desireth the new, for they say the old is better. And I think each of us have probably experienced that when we get new light and we say, wait a minute, we always thought it was this way. Why are we changing it now? And it's that challenge of what we're used to, the customs, and this is what custom is. So it goes on to talk about traditions, customs, and practices, and that is culture as well as religion. So all institutions have traditions, customs, and practices, including religion, but cultures and nations have customs, traditions, and practices, as we know. So different countries have different religions, different festivals that go with them. Even outside of religion, they have Christmas, perhaps they have different rituals that we do at certain times of year, or practices that people have. And when these are challenged that you've grown up with and known and experienced, it's very hard to change. And if they have this desire for the old, that it's better, that destroys appreciation, that power of that false teaching, how strong it is. And we know this is streams of information. Once you've accepted conspiracy theory, it destroys the appreciation and desire for truth, because you think you have truth. So it's a substitute, and it leads people off into a direction where they can't see truth and appreciate it. And Christ is trying to warn them.
But he says there, Christ says the old is, he says, all the truth that has been given to the world through patriarchs and the prophets shone out in new beauty in the words of Christ. So it's, even though you're saying it's old, it's shone out even better.
So the true old truth, that they should have known, the true old truth, they've amassed tradition and custom and practices on top of the truth. And now Christ comes, I think this is the dirt brush man with the jewels. Christ comes to wipe away the old wineskin and say, look, you've changed it. You're not really seeing what the patriarchs and prophets said. And I'm going to say it again in new beauty and say, this is what they meant. This is what they said. So for instance, they're practicing equality. They're not saying treat widows like this and put people down, and it's repackaging it in a form. And then they say, we don't recognize this. We don't want it because we like the customs, traditions, and practices, and we're holding on to them. But the scribes and Pharisees had no desire for the precious new wine. And it's not, as you say, it's not really new. This is what the patriarchs and prophets have taught of old. And Christ is now putting it before them in a new light, but it's the old truth.
Emma, is that like the people of the world wanting to hold on to culture then?
Yes, I would say.
And patriarchy. We don't want it, the new thing.
Yeah.
We want to hold on to that because it suits us.
Absolutely. And we love it, and we don't want the cross that it requires to change it.
Cherish sins,
yeah. And so feminism comes along and threatens that established custom, tradition, and practice. And they say, no. They had no place in mind or heart for the teachings of Christ, because their hearts are attached to the traditions, customs, and practices. And many of us, they're meant to be attached to old truth. So we're meant to build a foundation and build on it, and so that we are solid and stable and settled. But if our foundation has got a mixture of false doctrine or understanding in it, misunderstanding, which every generation has, that Christ comes to correct, it's very hard to build a proper building with a solid foundation if the foundation isn't solid. I don't know if that makes sense. They had no place in heart or mind for the teachings of Christ. They clung to the dead forms. So now she says that this is dead forms because they've covered the truth with customs, practices, and traditions, and that's dead. It's not living, and it turns them away from the living truth and the power of God in the person of Christ in that history. And we can apply that to our time in the person of the messenger of Christ. So when the messenger comes with this new truth, it sounds alien, it sounds strange, it's not what we thought we believed, but we now have to be willing to re-examine that, throw out what's not true, or uncover the truth and throw out the customs, traditions, and practices. And that means going against the established position in the church and in the world. We're finding now this is a much bigger than just the church. This is the world, as we know, as Debbie said, it's patriarchy in the world. And it's really hard. It's really hard to do that. Does somebody want to read? Somebody please read the next one, the 280.1.
Yeah, I'll read that one. So it was this.
Yes.
Yeah, it was this that proved the ruin of the Jews, and it will prove the ruin of many souls in our own day. Thousands are making the same mistake as did the Pharisees, whom Christ reproved at Matthew's feast. Rather than give up some cherished idea or discard some idol of opinion, many refuse the truth which comes down from the Father of light. They trust in self and depend upon their own wisdom and do not realize their spiritual poverty. They insist on being saved in some way by which they may perform some important work. When they see that there is no way of weaving self into the work, they reject the salvation provided.
So, do you want to comment on that, Debbie, or do you want to? So I know Natalie just said there's the point right there of the last sentence, or second to last sentence. Was it
Could
when
I-
they- Yes, go on. Is that?
Could I comment?
Yes.
You said when your foundations and principles are based on culture and things that were not right, immediately my thought is our textbook for heaven is the Bible. And yet there is the principles. So we thought the principles that have been laid down are by men who were misogynistic. Their whole world was based on patriarchy. And I'm saying, how then do you expect the generations thereafter to behave when that is what we've been taught ever since? I know Christ came and did a work amongst the generations then, but as you've been saying, people have always been brought up on this diet of misogynistic ideas and patriarchy. It's just confusing. Why is the Bible then used the way we've used it? Can you blame people?
Yes. No. Okay. So I think your question is really, well, it feels like if it's that rocky, we're built on patriarchy. So how can we now move from that if it's not a solid foundation? So let me just explain. When I said about the foundation, I think what I'm seeing is we've got a foundation as Christians, and obviously a lot of those principles, a lot of that is solid. It is solid, but it's mixed with some things that we've not got correct, and so that's that kind of covered over traditions, customs, etc., that Christ then came to uncover in that history. So I'm not saying that the foundation is not solid, but there are parts of it that need adjusting, or there's things in our thinking and our teaching, as we know, that need adjusting. But I think something that really was a new thought to me this week, we had a prayer meeting on Wednesday and we talked about patriarchy. We were talking about the book, The Gender Knot, but what came out was a new thought for me, that patriarchy in itself wasn't bad in one sense. So when you have the fall of Adam and Eve, a structure is put in place to say somebody has to submit to somebody. And so you could look back at that and say, okay, males were given the domination in that sense, or given the privilege of the ones that the females submit to. And we see the priestly structure, we see the structures put in place, or the society is modeled on that pattern. And then obviously with sin and oppression and perversion, it becomes not fit for purpose. But a new thought that we had Wednesday was that things in themselves can get to the stage where they're not fit for purpose, even outside of sin. And that's something that, so it starts, okay, it was given for a purpose. And then as we go through history, it could have stayed that way. It could have been okay if sin hadn't corrupted the plan. Now, even though it's plan B, because, originally it seems Adam and Eve were made equal, but they were made equal, and didn't seem one had to submit to another. Even with that plan in place, it could have gone okay if men hadn't abused the position of being in that leadership role, I suppose you could say. So perhaps for a time it would have been all right, and then we'd have moved to something else, even with or without sin corrupting it. And that was a challenging thought, because I think we think it's not fit for purpose because of sin, and it's never been fit for purpose because we've always sinned from the beginning. So it's like, well, but two illustrations were given to prove that point. There's that in heaven, the government in heaven had been ruling for a set time, and then they decided that it was time for a change. So God steps forward and says, "This is Christ, my son. We're equal to, and you need to recognize the position of Christ in the Godhead." And Lucifer goes, "Well, I'm not submitting to that." So there's this change of plan and structure, not because of sin, but we don't know the reason, but there was some reason why it had to transition from not being, I guess you could say, not fit for purpose, but not because of sin, not because it was bad, but now we're moving on to something else. And we talked about how when you're 5, what you do when you're 5 isn't the same as what you do when you're 10. So as you grow up, things change and structures change and behavior changes, understanding changes. And then another example is the sacrificial system. The sacrificial system was put in place by God, was fit for purpose until Christ comes and says, now I'm fulfilling it. We don't need it anymore. And that's not to do with sin, that it changes. So I don't know if people get that thought. So that might help understand your question, Brian, that it's not patriarchy per se that's bad in itself. It's what's happened down the ages with that now it's not fit for purpose because of sin as well. But there may have come a point when it would have changed anyway, and we haven't changed it, or we need to change it now. There's that kind of level of complexity to it, I think. Does that make sense? That's
Yeah,
Brian.
the trace of it, definitely.
Yeah, and Primrose, you've got your hand up.
Okay, I think you also said what I wanted to contribute. I'll just share that. I think truth is progressive, and at a certain stage in life, a certain amount of truth might be relevant for that stage, but then as you move on, it doesn't become the same as it was when you were younger. Let me give an example, maybe of a child and Christmas. Even as much as if people don't believe in Santa and all, I just want to make a point. A little child will believe, if I'm good, I'll get a present from Santa. And at that time, that's all they think of. It's relevant for them. But as they grow up, they'll begin to realize, oh, Santa is not there. But does that mean they should then discard being obedient and being good? They now have another reason for being good and being obedient other than getting a present from Santa. So also God is constrained by limitations when he works with human beings. I don't know if this will come out correctly, but I think the work of God and man has limitations. For example, patriarchy wasn't, maybe if you look at it now, wasn't the best solution, but that was the limitation that was there. That, okay, there's sin, and for Adam and Eve to coexist, there's one that has to submit, to be in submission. And in as much as it was violated and all, but God was limited to the current scenario or present situation. And as we go further, those limitations sometimes we find ways to bypass them. So that makes truth progressive. So my point I wanted to say is that if we're going to be stuck in saying this is how things were done and should remain this way, then we can never progress with God, because truth is progressive and God expects us to grow from step to step, stage to stage. And then as we grow, he opens up other things. And I mean, God opens up other truths that we should then embrace and progress and grow better, So I don't know if I made my points clear, but then my major point was God is affected by limitations, and also truth is progressive, and
Absolutely. Yeah.
and the point of new wine in old and old wine, you see, old wine tastes better because we are accustomed to it. We have settled in it. It's like your palate when you try olives for the first time or molasses for the first time. You're like, wow, what's this horrible thing? But
I can
molasses is
understand.
good for you, you know but all of a sudden you're just told you need to take molasses, and you're shifting from a certain lifestyle. It's horrible, but then you have to start developing a new palate for molasses,
Yeah.
and after 2-3 years or so, you are the champion of molasses. So I don't know whether it makes sense. Yeah.
And yes, and I think there has to be a willingness to set, like you said, you recognize it's good for you. So there has to be a willingness to now move with it, even if it's not comfortable and I don't like it at first. And what you said that God is limited and that these things are put in place and and we grow and progress perhaps out of them. You did say something I thought was interesting. You said, and maybe patriarchy wasn't the best thing, but, and I was thinking, but maybe it was the best thing. You see, that's the best thing at the time because God put that in place for our benefit. And I think it's that recognition that whatever God does at that time, obviously, I agree there's limitations because of humans' understanding. So God sees the sin, says, okay, we're going to do something to a safety net here to make it not as bad as it could be. Or, we're going to constantly do things to help them. And those things that Godhead puts in place to help us are often misinterpreted, misunderstood, misused, and then we go down the line and go, what did God do that for? And God's going, I did this to help you, and you've just twisted it out of shape, and now it's not helping. Because if Adam had stayed close to God and true to God, which I'm sure he did after that, we have record he did. Even Adam could have had did have perhaps a very happy relationship. We don't have any record they didn't have a happy relationship after that. What brought the grief now is obviously the children. Lots of things happen after that. But the fact is, if they had stayed submitted to God, and this is the argument people use now, it's like, well, God put that in place. It's good that a woman submits to the man. And he said in a sinful condition, that's a good plan. And not recognizing how far we've come and how bad it's got. But yeah, so I think God does these things at every step of the way. And if we recognize God is good, that everything God does is good, fit for purpose, positive, until we then twist it out of shape, and then somebody comes and writes about it with a patriarchal mindset, and it's hard for us to see through the veil of the character of God. So God's constantly then trying to unveil what God is like and say, this is what I'm like, this is where we're going. And each generation we have to we fall back and go forward and back and forward, and it feels like a game. Anyway, Blessing, put your hand up.
Yes. I just wanted to say, I think what makes accepting change in this context difficult is the fact that God set something up to begin with. So if you look at the situation in heaven, for example, Lucifer had a position of preeminence in, God's plan. And it seemed for, I don't know how long, that, the Lucifer was working with Jesus almost as, equal partner. I don't exactly understand how things work, but there was no reason to think at the time, it seemed, that Lucifer was below Jesus, and the Godhead had said that so, and then all of a sudden a change is coming and you're thinking, wait a minute, why are things changing? And I think it makes it difficult, and it seems that I guess that's the testing part, the difficulty, with accepting why things are changing now. And I think the sacrificial system example you gave as well would show a similar dynamic, because the Jews had reason to believe that they were the chosen of God. They had documents to prove that, and history. The experiences of the Israelites coming out of Egypt, with all the miracles that took place, them being given the promised land, the promises given by the prophets, all those things, that you're going to be God's special people, the Gentiles will submit to you. There's just so many things that they were given. And then Jesus comes and says, that's not how things are going to work anymore. And that's difficult. It's actually difficult to accept. So that's what I just wanted to contribute, that the fact that this being, or this governing body, that I guess within the context of our discussion is recognized somehow, the Jews recognize God. Sure, Lucifer and the other angels did have a recognition of the Godhead, to a degree, because it seemed like Lucifer had more of an issue with Jesus than Lucifer had with the other members of the Godhead. So yeah.
Do you think that's because of the thought that he was equal to Christ, and then realized he wasn't?
Yeah.
There's something about that not being,
Yeah. So I'm thinking it's a similar dynamic with patriarchy, that there's so much that points to male leadership being the established way of doing things. Why change it? What's the rationale for that, really? And I guess the last thing I want to say is that I think the angels didn't have it easy. Even the angels that were on the right side of the issue. When you read Ellen White, it seems to suggest that they were not willing to go off on a limb and just, rebel against the government of God. But it's not that they necessarily understood everything. So it's like they said, maybe Lucifer has a point, but I'm not sure we would be prepared to go all out against the government of God like Lucifer and the other angels did. And it wasn't until the cross that their questions were, in many ways answered. And they started saying, no. So Lucifer didn't have a valid point, really. So yeah, I just wanted to say that it's not that, when change comes and we are asked to accept it, that we necessarily understand everything, or see the rationale for it necessarily. It seems like we're given enough to just, to at least trust that, okay, what's happening will be resolved with time. If we give it time and we trust the process, we will get the answers that we are looking for. It's not an immediate thing that I get it and it's all resolved and I'm faithful and I stand with God, because it didn't happen with the angels. So I would not think it happens with human beings either, because we're all free agents and we all have minds of our own. Yeah,
that's the challenge. And I think the challenge to us to answer is, I don't know if we can't answer it. I don't think, is why some people choose and when some people don't. Just like, in why did those angels go with Lucifer and those ones not? When everyone starts out seemingly from the same position, with the same opportunity or with the same information, and people make different decisions, and then we go down to, well, it's the condition of the heart. If your heart is honest, if your mind is honest, and then people say, well, God made the people that way. So it's like,
it wasn't the same condition. Jesus was above him. That's what they didn't know. Jesus was above Lucifer.
No, what I meant was, sorry,
he didn't like that.
Yeah, Natalie's saying it wasn't the same condition as Lucifer was. Christ was above Lucifer. Yeah, no, what I meant was the same conditions, as in they all started out in heaven with an understanding of the Godhead, and they all saw the shift, obviously. And yes, there's a different position now, but they've all got that same access to light, as it were, and yet they make different decisions. And you go, nothing was withheld from it. They were all given the same information, I suppose. That's what I meant.
And the angels around them, are the ones who discouraged and pushed Satan, probably. No, it doesn't say that, but we've discussed that when we were on camp, that Satan was probably pushed by angels, and also he wants to go and push himself.
Right, so people supported him in his bad behaviour.
Yes. Yeah. And that just makes you not be able to turn back even more.
Because now you've got support, you're popular. And I think that's and one of the other things, Blessing, you said, I think struck me is they thought that God did change what the Godhead had said. So it's like we think, well, we've misinterpreted what God said. You told us to do it this way, and that's why it's hard to change, because you think that's what God had said. So, but there's two aspects to that. There is the fact that we misunderstand what God says, but there's also the fact that God does say different things. So now, before that, God hadn't said anything about Lucifer and Christ, or seemingly it all looked equal, and now it wasn't. Or God said, do sacrifices. Now God says, don't do sacrifices. So they do change what they say, and then people find it hard to keep up with that.
And they have, like your quote says, they have reasons in their heart. Because it says, when they see that there is no way of weaving self into the work, they reject it for salvation. That's the Jews.
Yeah. So it's, yeah, going back to the quote, to pull out the reason, one of the reasons why is the Jews, it's the ruin of the Jews, and it will prove the ruin of many souls in our day, is because we make the same mistake as the Pharisees. Rather than give up some cherished idea or discard some idol of opinion, we refuse the truth because it cuts what we think about something or what we've learned about it and what we hold dear, because it maybe we thought it was our idea. They trust in self and depend upon their own wisdom and do not realize their spiritual poverty. They insist on being saved in some way by which they may perform some important work. So there's something about wanting to be important, wanting to do something important. I think that was our part of our problem as the movement. And then that we think we're going to do something glorious and we're not, and then everybody gets disappointed, and it's a challenge that we're not doing anything, we're not important, we're nobody. And on an individual level, when they see that there is no way of weaving self into the work, they reject the salvation provided. So there's a need to hold on to self and our own ideas and our own importance. And all through this movement, when we see people leave, there is a desire to be famous, a desire to be a leader or a teacher, or that you can see with some people, not everybody, because I think it's complex, but this is one reason given here where this self into the work, and this is what I wanted to pull out about the spirit of Babylon. So one of the reasons why people accept false doctrine and will not accept the true, and that's the first paragraph, that false doctrine just kills that desire for the truth, power of false teaching. And I think we could say conspiracy there is false doctrine of any kind that's misleading information, because there's something about self that's weaved into that doesn't want to let go. And I think that's what we see all through Daniel and Revelation. So going back to Revelation 17, if we trace from Daniel 2 and we see this repeat and enlarge of what's happening, then I think we can see the growth of the prophecies in Daniel similar to the growth in Revelation. So when we get Daniel 2, we see an image in Daniel 2. So we have the statue, and this is Satan's kingdom represented in this statue. I'm going to draw it very well, but you know, it's the statue. So, a wonky statue, right? But it's divided into the different kingdoms, and we see that through the image. 1, 2, no, 2 more. So, and although these are very distinct, different kingdoms that rise up in history, we see obviously there's a different change with the iron and feet, you know, being with the clay and the iron mixed together. So there's some difference here because it's all metal up to that point. So there is some detail given, but overall it's one kingdom. And that's seen in Daniel 2. So sorry, Daniel 3. So when you get to the plain of Dura and you see this kingdom, it is all gold. So this is all gold. And this is Nebuchadnezzar saying, Babylon's going to last forever. And someone's already made this point, I think, that on one level he was right, because Babylon does last forever. It goes all the way through. But in this one, it's not depicted that way because it's telling us something different. It's telling us these kingdoms will rise and fall. But even though that one will be destroyed and another one will take over, it's all part of Satan's kingdom overall. So it's all linked together. And this one's telling us Babylon is actually the spirit of it, or the ethos of it is going to continue all the way to the end. This is just one kingdom. And ultimately, that's Satan's kingdom. And so that depiction is then picked up later in Revelation. So that's Daniel 2 and 3, I suppose you can say. And then when you get to 7, you get the 4 beasts. And the 4th beast is got these 10 horns. So now you're getting more detail. It has the 10 horns plus the little horn. But as a general rule, you could say, or a level, this focuses on the kingdoms of the world as well. This is the kingdom. This is about the state part of those kingdoms. And when you get to Daniel 8, you get the ram and the he-goat, and you get more details on the little horn. But what we picked out last time was this is about the religion, because this is sanctuary imagery. These are sanctuary animals, the ram and the he-goat, the little horn. The horns were in the sanctuary. This is about the religion, I guess. There is state, and obviously it's state as well, but it's more focused on the church part of it. So this is this church-state relationship. This is the religion. And I put that carefully because when we see Daniel 8:13, it talks about the daily and the transgression of desolation. And that's making a distinction between, the two phases.
Pagan,
You know what I mean? Desolation. So, and we know that that's pagan and papal. That's how we've classed it anyway. Pagan and papal, Rome. But these are desolating powers, and they're not the same at all in one level. They're linked because they're both pagan, really, but there's a change, and that change is depicted there. But there's this religion that's carrying this spirit of persecution that goes through and tramples on God's people. And so we can see this repeating in large, these kingdoms, what they're going to do, they're trampling, they're persecuting. And here we see this religious element of it. And then we get to, obviously we've got Daniel 11, King of the North, King of the South. I was just going to skip right to Revelation 13. So we go to Revelation 12, I guess. So in Revelation 12, we've got this warfare between the woman, which we know is the true church, and the dragon. So we've got the dragon. And this dragon is Satan, 10 heads. No, 10 horns. What am I doing? 7 heads and 10 horns. I'm going from here. 7 heads and 10 horns. So now we've got this different detail. So we've got these 10 horns, and we can say they probably symbolize something different, but it's a similar imagery. And then the 7 heads are added in there. So, but this is Lucifer on one level, and then we see Ellen White say in a secondary sense it's pagan Rome. So it's a depiction of a state power that's doing something to God's people, but it's and she says pagan Rome in that context she's talking about, but we can see overall this is Satan. So the dragon is Satan that pulls the stars from heaven, etc. And then we get to Revelation 13 and Revelation 17. So I just wanted to do this in the context of 17. So when we get to 13, we see the beast. And this beast has now got 7 heads and 10 horns. And this period of the beast is the papacy. So we see this is papacy here. And then we see the second beast. So we're going to call it, I guess, the lamb-like horns. So we call it a lamb-like beast, but it's actually lamb-like horns, but beast, lamb-like horns.
It's not like onto a leopard. Second beast.
Yeah, and this one not only picks up the 10 horns, but it also picks up all the imagery in this chapter. So this beast is an amalgamate beast of the beasts here. So this is the lion, the bear, and the leopard. And here we see the lion, the bear, the leopard. So there's something about this being a continuation from Daniel 7. It's picking up that these are the same kingdoms from 7 with these 7 heads and 10 horns, but now it's got 7 heads and 10 horns. So the imagery's changed slightly. Here we know it's the 10 horns, and the little horn comes up, which is then discussed here. So this kind of expands on what's already gone, obviously repeating in large. The little horn, we see the details of the little horn, how it's got these phases of daily and transgression of desolation. And when you get here, you've got this beast with lamb-like horns that then speaks like a dragon. And it's going to make an image. So it makes this image, and it's going to cause the world to worship. And I think that's another thing I wanted to bring out when we're here. So the daily is paganism, and all those kings were, I guess, priest kings. So they were leaders of their religion as well as of their state. So they were worshipped as gods. And this is what Nebuchadnezzar wants. So when he gets here and he makes this image, he wants to be worshipped as a god king. And this is Lucifer all over. So he wants to be king of the north. He wants to be worshipped. And this is how these leaders wanted to be made great. And when you get to Daniel 8, it's the spirit of the daily, we said, is Gadal. And this is greatness. And this links back, I think, to the quote we're reading, that this self is weaved into the work, and we won't let go of our own idols and wanting to do something great. So they just want greatness. Each kingdom that comes is greater than the last one, and has this spirit of wanting to be great, wanting to be dominant, wanting to be godlike and untouchable and worshipped by people, to have ultimate power, supreme control. All that spirit is the spirit of all these kingdoms of Satan himself. So we get the dragon. So we get here, and it speaks like a dragon. It wants the whole world to worship. So it's all about the world worshipping.
And we used to say that the meager apostasy was Gadal.
The meager apostasy was Gadal. Probably we
Because
see
it's all about
Gadal
power
in
and-
the we
yeah.
recognize that Gadal is all about selfishness, and
Mm.
selflessness is the gospel. So it's about making self great, and I think that's what we need to see with Trump, because we know this whole MAGA movement, this whole making you great, is the spirit of all the old kingdoms of the world. And so we get here, and it's about the world now. It's not just about, I guess each one of those kingdoms represented the world at that time, although we know it wasn't the whole world. It's this spirit that we see in the world, and behind it is this dragon, is the devil. Then we get to 17, and we see the same beast, but now the beast is scarlet. So as an additional information, it's got the 7 heads and 10 horns, and it's got the woman now. So when we saw back here, for me, it's a similar pattern that we had the beasts here, and now we get the daily and the transgression of desolation. We get more detail about this, the ideology of these beasts, of what's going on behind the beasts, of the religious part of the beasts. And here we get the same. We get this woman now who is the daily and the transgression of desolation. So she's the religious element on these state powers. And when I say religion, it's paganism is a religion, I suppose, but it's a worldview, it's an ideology, it's a way that people live, and they almost worship, even if they're atheists. We've talked about almost being, it is a religion on one level. It's a belief system that people live by, and that shapes culture and shapes churches and shapes the thinking. So now we see this woman, and she's sitting on the heads, but she's also sitting on the water. And we discussed that last week, that there's several imageries in this chapter which make it more complicated, perhaps.
Are you saying water is people?
Water is people from 1715, yeah. So it interprets itself, and it tells us that in verse 15 of Revelation 17, that the waters which thou sawest are where the horse sitteth, are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. So this is something that's pervading many nations. It's not just one place. There's a worldwide imagery of it. It's an Alice throwing out, this sounds like the UN to, right, well, okay, so what we used to say,
USA.
let's go. So let's go look at Revelation 17. Yes. Any
Sorry, before
blessings,
you
sorry.
move on, before you move on from the point you were making about these entities wanting to be great, it seems to me that these entities have reason to believe that they should be great.
Mm-hmm.
And in and of itself, is it unreasonable for them to think that? So going back to the founder of this ideology or set of principles, Lucifer didn't just say, I should be great from nowhere. Lucifer looked at the influence and authority that he already had. I guess the Bible and the spirit of prophecy depict Lucifer's appearance as commending Lucifer to some kind of role of eminence. So when Lucifer makes that claim that injustice is done in him not being recognized as some premier leader, maybe having the prerogatives of other members of the Godhead, it's not unfounded, I guess is what I'm saying. So when Nebuchadnezzar, for example, says Babylon is great and should be great, I know this happens after chapter 3, but he makes a similar claim that look at this kingdom. Is not this great Babylon, which I have built by the power of my majesty? Saying Babylon is a great nation. It's a powerful nation. Look at what it's capable of doing. How can it not be, the ruler of the world? So, yeah, I guess it's a question, but also more of a rhetoric question, kind of like food for thought. It can be answered, but I'm just saying there seems to be a reason to make that assertion.
Yes, and I think that's a really valid point. And then picking up on that God gives power to those nations in one sense. So it's almost like God raises up Nebuchadnezzar. We know Babylon was raised up as a scourge for Israel because of disobedience. But at the same time, when we looked at Daniel recently with Daniel 4 and the tree, that tree was supposed to be feeding the whole earth, which is a type of the glorious land. It was meant to be a blessing. And when you were speaking, I was writing down Nebuchadnezzar, the Jews and the SDA church. It was God's plan that the Jews be great, that they be a light to the whole world. And I know Debbie put in the chat the SDA church, and it was God's plan that the SDA church evangelize the whole world or go around the whole world and be an influence for good, for the truth. So in that sense, they needed to be great on one level. And if Babylon had been faithful now with contact with Daniel, if Babylon had been that tree and stayed that tree, I suppose the root of that question is what went wrong. Is that
Yeah, so
it
where
would
is
have
the
been all right to be
problem?
gold all the way through because it would have been good to be gold because Babylon was good and it was doing a blessing to the whole world. Yeah.
Could we
Yeah,
still
so
say
I guess
that?
that's
Oh,
Just
go on.
let sorry, Blessing, just respond back to that. Did you have more
oh, yeah,
thoughts?
I was saying, yeah, so what would the problem be then? Is it necessarily the idea of saying, we're supposed to be great? Because in and of itself, it seems like it's self-evident, that
Mhm.
Babylon is great, Lucifer is great. Where's the problem then?
Yeah. What's the problem? We need to know the answer to that one. If the problem is when the greatness is misused, surely it must be the fact that you were meant to be great for a purpose, but you misuse the purpose. So now instead of being great and leading like the Jews, witnessing to the Gentiles, they want to kill the Gentiles. There's that whole, it's been twisted out of shape, even though they were meant to be great. I don't know.
Could we also say, could we also say that USA, God using the USA and the Constitution, could we add that to the list? Because obviously God wanted them to be great in the way that they were supposed to live a life, and there was conditions to that. God would prosper them, wouldn't they? Obviously, if they met the conditions, which is sticking to the Constitution.
Yeah, absolutely. And it started out that way. Primrose, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, Emma, I wanted to say that I think there's this scenario that Blessing mentioned takes us back to the question that Brian had. Why did then God allow for us to have the Bible when it has these things that are in it that seem to be error now and all? What it for me it seems like it's almost the same question. Why God created Lucifer to be, he looked good. When the Bible describes Lucifer, he's a really good looking being. Lucifer is a good looking being, and so why is he not? Why is Lucifer not part of, you know, the leadership? When Babylon was created to chastise Israel, the Israelites, it was made powerful, beautiful. So why can't it claim that beauty? The Jews were made to be a peculiar people. That's what the Bible says. They're a peculiar people, a royal priest, like a royal nation and all. It's like God elevates you, but you're not allowed to claim that elevation. The SDA Church, um, America as well, was created there to be a distinct nation, to be a refuge. But what I wanted to say is, I think the problem is, and I could be wrong, it comes back to this spirit of Gadao, where yes, you're created and you're beautiful, but then the moment you start looking at yourself and trying to glorify yourself, then you've lost the purpose of your creation. God has an appointed way, um, that we can see constantly, that God raises up someone or something for a purpose to save everyone else, and that entity or that person should be a refuge, for people's salvation. But the moment that person or that institution loses sight of God's appointed way, and they begin to look at self and try to glorify themselves, then it's not fit for purpose anymore, because the spirit of Gadal has now entered in them. You know, they want to exalt themselves. And I think because they want to exalt themselves, you'll soon realize that you're not fitting into God's appointed way of salvation, and then you end up rejecting it. So, like, America was meant to be a land of refuge for everyone that's persecuted, meant to be the hub of, like, I think you'd call them the cities of refuge, you know, from the Bible. It was meant to be a city of refuge. But then the moment it starts saying, America, we are just going to think about ourselves, want to be great, then it ceases to be fit for purpose. The SDA Church was meant to evangelize the whole world, like you said, and, you know, show God the light. But then when we start thinking, well, this group of people is not fit for heaven, and we start pronouncing judgment on others and being an exclusive entity, trying to make ourselves great, then we've lost sight of what God wants us, God had intended for us to be. So I think there's an issue of self-exaltation and self-recognition compared to what God wants you to be. Whatever God makes is beautiful. Like you said, patriarchy was beautiful when God made it, but when allowed it to be there, it that was, for that time, it was beautiful. But then the moment we twist things, then they cease to be perfect for anything, and they bring self-destruction, and they move up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you saying, you know, it's when self gets in the way, and I don't think that's even conscious. I think what it looks like is this rejection of light in your generation. So the church is set up as a light on a hill. It's supposed to be doing this work. It's got derailed a little bit because of its understanding of doctrine and prophecy, a little bit darkness, whatever. But then light comes to restore it back on path, and it says, no, I don't want it. And when they do that, then they really now enter that kind of rejection, apostate phase. So Babylon falls in the Millerite history because they reject that light that comes, and they just stay as they were. So they haven't done anything different, really. I mean, she talks about all the worldliness coming into the churches, but the fact is they're holding on to Sunday and they're not moving into the sanctuary with the Millerites. So there's this thing about not moving with light when it comes puts you in a position of death because you're not growing. And I think that's what Debbie was saying when she mentioned the Constitution, that they have that, but you can't stay stagnant. It's like a plant. You have to keep growing. And if you don't keep growing and progressing, you're dead. And it's that idea that it constantly changes and you're
Should
constantly
we have a
growing.
living constitution?
A living constitution, yeah, I think so. America is now becoming the land of oppression and persecution, Debbie says, and against their constitution, yeah, because they're not growing with it in the light of when the progressives come and the feminism and the people clamoring for equality, people are not growing in that light in the same way the church isn't. I think stuck, yeah. Andres, put your hand up.
Yeah, so I was thinking about the question of why or what's wrong with self-glorification, if I can put it that way. And I think I have a theory. I would like to for you to test it or like,
Okay.
yeah, just put it out there. So like my theory is that there's nothing wrong with self-glorification until it comes to a point where you want to project something that's not true. For example, in the case of Lucifer, it was a fact that Lucifer was great, but when it came to wanting to participate, you know, in the creation of humanity, Lucifer wasn't qualified to do it. So God's going to have a meeting with Christ who is actually qualified to do so. And now Lucifer comes to a point where they want to, they're questioning, why am I not allowed there? And the answer is because you're not qualified. So you're not that great. And Lucifer doesn't accept that and wants to still participate, even though they're not qualified. They can't drive the ship, let's say that way. So that's when self-glorification comes to play.
So he's not qualified, but he also wants to be in someone else's position. He wants the attention, doesn't he, that someone else got? So he wants to divert that from Christ to him, doesn't he?
Yeah, so Christ
Yeah.
is qualified. Yeah, Christ is qualified. Lucifer is not qualified to do the task at hand.
Yeah,
And still Lucifer wants to take that task.
take that position.
Can I just add to that? On Elder Paminda's South African videos, I think it was video 8, part 3, he talks about how comparing and contrasting with marriage, and he was saying about the USA, the executive branch, Trump was not, or he was saying he wasn't, was he qualified enough for the job? And when you look at the people he's chosen, are they qualified for the job? And I would say no, he's definitely not qualified for the job.
Yeah.
So yeah, I like that bit about not qualified, yeah,
But wants the job.
but wants the job anyway.
And to me, I think that's, I was thinking that thought when Blessing was speaking as well, and maybe it was Rose actually, but similar, that they want the job. There's something about getting in the way of God instead of, like Lucifer wants to be worshipped and wants to be king of the north and wants to be there instead. And so when someone gets in the way, like Nebuchadnezzar, it's great to be glorious, to be good. Everybody can love Nebuchadnezzar, that's fine. He's the tree that's providing for everyone. But now when he says, I want to be the one that everyone bows down to, because this image is representative of his kingdom and him, it's now he's in the way. He's interposing between God and the people. And so it's now God is obscured by the person. Instead of helping God do the work on earth, they're obscuring God's character by the way they behave. They become God. Yeah. But there's something about
and
understanding of God because of it.
and God, like in that case, for example, God wants to be king of the north. So it can't be wrong to wanting to be king of the north can't be wrong in and of itself, just as like wanting to receive glory, like
wanting to be worshipped. God wants to be worshipped.
Yeah, exactly. Like the second angel says, like give God glory, give glory to God. So God, like my suggestion is God is qualified for whatever, yeah, for governing the whole world, and that's what Lucifer wants to do, I think.
Yeah.
And not being qualified. So the problem is with the qualification, not with wanting to do the task in and of itself.
No, so it would be good to aspire to be like God. It's good to
Yeah,
aspire to be God in a way, because that's what
yeah.
we're told to
When
do.
you're
really.
qualified.
Yeah, but you're not qualified to be it necessarily.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I started to put Abraham and Job because I had that thought before, but I forgot about it. But when we talked about greatness, and I think for me, they have reason to be great. And what's wrong with being great? And it's similar to what you're saying. What's wrong with wanting to be the leader, to be the boss? And Abraham was I think is one of the closest to what it should have looked like in a way, because he's walking after God's own heart. He's got his encampment of people that he rules, and as a friend of God, he does it properly, and he's got all these groups, these families, these servants that are on one level. And I know there's lots of inequality, but are treated equally. Everybody's circumcised. Everybody joins voluntarily to worship God because they see something about Abraham that they like, that there's attractive. So his encampment grows. And then they have these kind of Sabbath school groups, classes, which are taught by the father. There's this kind of hierarchical structure of teaching that goes on so that people have an understanding of the true God and of how to worship God. And to me, that it should just spread like that through the world. And so even though he's the leader, he's like a servant leader. You get the impression that he's like God. He's not ruling over. He's not drawing attention to himself per se. Even Job, he's given all these riches and this glory because we're like, they have reason to be great. Job was the greatest man in the East, but they still were faithful servants of God. And I think that's so there's nothing wrong. I think it was just backing up the point that yes, it's okay to be great. Yes, depends what you do with it. And maybe Abraham's a good example of what it looks like when you do it properly. And yeah,
they weren't looking just to make themselves great, were they?
No, Abraham's constantly setting up altars everywhere he goes to worship the true God. It's glory to God all the time. And then the ultimate sacrifice of Isaac. I know he made a mistake, but it's with Hagar but I think that should give us comfort that overall the whole thing, and then to give that illustration of the gospel with Isaac, it's quite, yeah, it was a powerful example. Yeah, there
Yeah,
are just some
can I?
people. Yeah, go on, Blessing.
I just wanted to ask something to Andreas, I guess, in relation to his theory, but applying it to Nebuchadnezzar's case. That so in Nebuchadnezzar's case, would the problem be that Nebuchadnezzar didn't recognize his limitations? So God is saying, your kingdom's going to rule, but it can only rule to a certain point. And Nebuchadnezzar is saying, no, my kingdom can rule forever, which was basically a very ambitious, bold attempt. So God is trying to communicate to Nebuchadnezzar that you are great, but you're limited. And Nebuchadnezzar rejects the fact that he's limited. So the qualification bit, would that be an example of what you're saying, Andre?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I hadn't thought about Nebuchadnezzar. I mean, I did think, but I couldn't come up with how it played out in that instance. But it makes sense the way you say it, I think, to me.
I know this is a different thought, Blessing, but how, well, or anybody actually, what was he thinking? Forever. What does forever look like? Because it was forever in his lifetime. I mean, he got the 7 years in the wilderness because he rebelled, but then he got restored, and the kingdom did last for his lifetime. It's only in Belshazzar's that it got destroyed. So when he's saying forever, does he mean in his lifetime? Does he mean forever, like he's a God king and he's going to live through eternity as the leader of it forever, like be God? So he's not qualified to be God, and that's the limit.
It just means while I'm here, no one's going to be.
And while I'm here, yeah, Natalie's saying, while I'm here, no one's going to be above me, which is what happened, really. And he could have had that without him saying, I'm going to be great, I'm going to last forever. So yeah, I think that's probably, I don't know what he thought it looked like, just his lifetime, I guess. But that's not forever,
Yeah.
unless he thought.
Yeah, that's an interesting.
Forever.
It's an interesting question, actually, how Nebuchadnezzar interpreted the vision of Daniel 2. That when God was saying, you are this head of gold and then another kingdom shall come after you, how did he interpret that? Did he think that, he's going to be overthrown by someone in his lifetime? Or did he really understand that, okay, this is something that's going to happen down the line to one of my, great grandchildren? That's an interesting question. I don't have an answer to it, but it's interesting to think what he thought of it. But in either case, it seems like he rejected the idea that, he could only rule to a certain point. There's limitations to Nebuchadnezzar's ability to be great, I can say.
And if he's thinking eternity means to be God, which is Andreas's point about Lucifer not being qualified, he's not qualified because he's not God. He can't rule for eternity. If that's what he's thinking, he wants to, like the Egyptian pharaohs wanted to carry on through the afterlife to be kings, and they took all their stuff with them with that in mind. So maybe that's Nebuchadnezzar's mindset. But you feel like the behind the scenes conversation, the first thing you'd go to Daniel and say, is this going to happen in my lifetime or not? And I wonder if Daniel would have told him, well, if you're faithful, it doesn't have to happen in your lifetime. I don't know if they knew that until they get to Belshazzar. I'm not sure, speculating, but interesting. But it still would follow that he's not qualified to rule for eternity, obviously, because he's not God, just like Lucifer. So Brian has a question in the chat. So then, is the Bible as it's written fit for purpose, or is it a case of how readest thou? Meaning we have to read into the mindset of God and decipher the real message being portrayed. And I think that's what the movement's doing. So on one level, we've said the Bible and the prophets of the world or the newspapers are not enough. They're not good enough information for us to use, but we don't have any other sources. It's not, a good source. But on the other hand, that's the only source. So I think with that question, yes, it's fit for purpose, and it is how readest thou, and our job, because all this we're looking at is the Bible, and we wouldn't have a message without the Bible. That is our message. But we've got to learn now dispensationally how to read it with parables, and that's what we've in this movement are doing, deciphering the real message being portrayed. And it's the problem you've got is it's not just when it's written. When it was fit for purpose then, what was being written about, but now we're 2,000, 4,000 years, however many years down from when people wrote it, and it's not relevant to us anymore. It's not the same, we've progressed in what's expected of us.
And I think we have to be intellectually honest about the God we serve, things that they did do they did do.
Yes.
We can't try and twist that, oh, it means this and it means that. No, that is the God that we serve and love.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where we've gone wrong in the past, where we try to twist it to make it sound nicer and softer and a better God, a lovely God. And I think it is how it is. And then as time goes on, there's parts of the Bible that we know we have to read in a certain way. And I know that sounds a bit, oh, you read it, you cherry pick what you read in a certain way and not others.
And there's still things, obviously, that we don't understand. So there's stories that are just seem, like you say, we've got to be intellectually honest, that's what God did, or that's seemingly how it's written about what God did. So whether
big picture,
we don't know the big picture, we can't answer everything, but I think we have enough information to know that God is good, and that if we still don't understand it, there's some disconnect perhaps between the way the people wrote it and the way we're still seeing it. So I think that's two factors that make it harder. So the person has their own interpretation. So when they say God's opened the ground and swallowed them, this is the language of their time. That's how they read that event. And we might say today there was an earthquake and they got killed, and well, maybe that's judgment of God, maybe it isn't. You know, the way we see something would be very different from the way the mind of Moses would see it. And I think that has to be taken into account as well. So it looks very stark and harsh that God opened up the ground and swallowed these people. I'm not saying God didn't do that, because there's this element of miracles and supernatural as well. But in our time, we wouldn't phrase it like that. We wouldn't see it like that per se. But then there are supernatural events. I mean, crossing the Red Sea, Noah's Ark, the flood. I mean, yeah, so you've got that factor in there about the divinity and the supernatural nature of God, but it's also playing into the mindset of the people at the time. So, and our mindset is now much more scientific, much less miraculous. So we do see God in a different way, I think, and the way God operates.
I think I like what Elder Paminda says, is I'm paraphrasing, not putting words into his mouth, but you've got to believe that God is good.
Yes,
ultimately. Otherwise, where are we? We're lost.
Yeah.
Without a compass or whatever. We just don't see the whole picture.
Definitely. So there are bound to be things you don't understand, because we're not God, and we are limited, and we're not qualified in many ways because of the way we see. Yeah, 6,000 years of sin has kind of made a big problem for us. But yeah, the root of that, as Natalie says, is this belief that God is good. So even if I don't understand it, I'm going to err on the side of mercy with God, that this is a good thing that happened, or that it was the right thing to do, even though I don't understand it. So let's go to okay. So let's go back to Revelation 17, and there's commentary here from 7 Bible commentaries. Do I need to read this? Maybe it's helpful to read this. This is 7 BC, and then we'll go to 17 itself. So 9, can't see that, 983. 983.3.
That is what we put in.
And 4 and 5 and 6 and 7, I think, as well. So if you go to the Ellen White app with the scripture references, as everyone knows how to use that, where it says scripture index, you can click on a chapter in the Bible and see the quotes where she directly references those chapters in the Bible, and they'll give you the quotes. So it's actually paragraphs 3 to 7. I don't feel read it all. So this is the commentary on, and then it's verse by verse commentary often. So if she says anything on that verse. So this is the commentary on Revelation chapter 17, verses 1 to 5. And she also links that to chapter 13, 18, and 2 Thessalonians, which talk about the papacy, I guess we could say, or the power of the man of sin, the deceiving the world, the beast, making the image to the beast in 13. But you can look at this afterwards. So it's 783. In the 17th of Revelation is foretold the destruction of all the churches who corrupt themselves by idolatrous devotion to the service of the papacy, those who have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. So Ellen White's commenting on the churches who are corrupting themselves by this idolatrous devotion to the service of the papacy. There is represented the papal power, which with all deceivableness of unrighteousness, by outside attraction and gorgeous display, deceives all nations, promising them, as did Satan our first parents, all good to those who receive its mark, and all harm to those who oppose its fallacies. The power which has the deepest inward corruption will make the greatest display, and will clothe itself with the most elaborate signs of power. The Bible plainly declares that this covers a corrupt and deceiving wickedness. Upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. What is it that gives its kingdom to this power? Protestantism, a power which, while professing to have the temper and spirit of a lamb, and to be allied to heaven speaks with the voice of a dragon. It is moved by a power from beneath. So she's picking out, obviously, the papacy and the Protestants, how they follow this spirit of the papacy. But I think the thing that was coming through to me is this deception. So there's the deception that it's something good, and I think when it isn't. And I think that God can't use deception in the way that Lucifer can. And this is this spirit that goes through Satan's kingdom, is this spirit of deception. And this is where false streams of information, conspiracy theories, it's all deception. And it's very clever in the information war that we're in. And once people are hooked onto those deceptions, it's almost impossible to get them out of it. And they wander after the beast. They wander after that story, that picture they've been given.
Yeah.
And in both chapters, there's this like great admiration in 13 and 17 for these, which I think is how it moves on the heart. People just, lust after it. It feels good. It appeals to something in the flesh that of greatness. Yeah, greatness. She also comments on 13 to 14 in chapter 17. Maybe we'll come back to that. So we're in 17. Let's just read the verses. So we've got up to 7. And the angel said unto me, wherefore didst thou marvel? So he's just been wondering with great admiration. I will tell you the mystery of the woman. So now we're going to uncover more of this mystery woman Babylon, and of the beast that carrieth her, which hath 7 heads and 10 horns. And then in verse 8 it says, the beast that thou sawest was over here. So this is
Revelation 17.
This is Revelation 17, verse 8. So this is the beast. The beast that thou sawest was, is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit. So it was, is not, and shall ascend. And I think this is an old study. We touched on this last time. So the was, we said, was in the past, and we said is not is present, and shall ascend is future. So and this is why we pinpointed, I suppose, where John was last week. So John is at the end of the wilderness time period in 1798. So we're going to put roughly 1798 here is when the is not phase of this beast is. So the beast was, is not, and shall ascend. The beast that thou sawest, this is the woman, 7 heads and 10 horns, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit and go into perdition. And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was, is not, and yet is. And yet is, when you look at it, it sounds like yet is might be present, but it is actually future. It's just the way it's written. Yet is sometime in the future if we add there. 9, and here is the mind which hath wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. So I think we drew this last week. So we've got the beast with the 7 heads, and the woman is sitting on these heads. So we've got this woman. I don't know how to draw the woman, but she's sitting on the heads, but not quite sitting there, but anyway. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So, but when we used to do this study, I think we did this last time as well. We put the woman lying across the heads, because she's not just sitting in that picture. It seems like she's not sitting on one head; she's lying across all the heads. So first we put her; she's kind of lying across all these heads. This woman is on the heads. She's also on the waters, we know from the beginning of the chapter. So there's a layer to it there that we've seen. And then it says these 7 heads are mountains. So the heads equal a mountain. And there are 7 kings. So I think we did this last time as well. There are 7 kings. We said 7 mountains. A mountain is a symbol of a kingdom. And a kingdom can be equated to a king. And we see that in Daniel 2, with never being it says, thou art this head of gold. He is Babylon, and he is the king. So the king identifies with a kingdom. So we can say that a king equals a kingdom or a king. So these 7 heads are 7 kings. And then it follows the same imagery as we've just read in verse 8. There are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, 1 is. So we're going to put 7 kings here. So fallen. And then we could put 5 underneath. one is, and does it say one is yet to come? 5 have fallen, one is, and the other is not yet come. Not, bless you. Not yet come. Okay, so there's one. And I'm going to put, I guess we could put 6. Let's put 6.
Go.
And this is 7. But now the complexity comes. So does everybody remember doing this before? I think probably everybody here should have done this before, but I don't know to what depth. And there's 75 have fallen, one is, the other is not yet come, and when he cometh, he must continue a short space. So we should take heart that this only continues a short space. Continues.
Can you say what short space is?
If we drop down, we'll say
Yeah.
short space is 1 hour, I think. I'll put it there in a minute. Continues a short space. And the beast that was, so now we're going back to the beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th. So it's now saying this beast is the 8th. Beast that was is not, even he is the 8th, and is of the 7 and goeth into perdition. So the reason why this is, I guess, worded like this is because the number 8 is related to resurrection, and I think we said that last time too. I don't know if we gave any verses for that, but the idea that the 8th day is a symbol of resurrection, because we see that Christ rose on the first day of the week, which is also the 8th day of the week. Baptism and circumcision was on the 8th day, and circumcision was an indication of baptism, sorry, a symbol of baptism, which is where someone is immersed in, dies and resurrects.
The circumcision on the 8th day.
On the 8th day, it was the Jewish law to circumcise the firstborn on the 8th day.
I thought there was a prophet who did.
They might have done. Probably thinking of a story. Hold on, I'm just going to find if I can see my other references. Oh, there's too many. I have them somewhere. There was some more. Anybody got any other thoughts about the 8th day being resurrection? Perhaps I should put resurrection. I had it in my notes somewhere.
There's the story of Noah. You have 8 people that resurrect the human race after the flood.
Yes. Yeah, that's good.
That's the one you go back to, isn't it, originally?
So God's resurrection, past, present, future. So it's picking out there's something about this. If something's resurrected, it's lived before. So it's, and it says it's this 8th one. Sorry, someone's put something, 8th is alive again. Yeah, it's alive again, which means it's been alive before. And in Revelation 17, it says the beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th and is of the 7. So it's one of the 7. So there isn't really an 8th head, because it's using the numbers of the heads. It's saying he is the 8th, and you think 8th what? The only obvious answer is not the 8th beast. There aren't 8 beasts on one level, but there's 8 heads, 7 heads. So it's the 8th head, but it's the beast itself that was, is not, and shall ascend, and the heads are following that pattern. But it's resurrected one of the 7. So one of the 7 that's already gone before, it's one of those. And the way we taught it is when let's carry on. So it says, here's the 8th and is of the 7. So we don't perhaps know at this point which one of the 7 he is. If he's more than one of the 7, but he's of the 7. And he isn't real anyway, because he's not, there isn't an 8th head, but the beast itself now becomes one of the 7.
What are you reading, which one?
17:11. But we know it goes into perdition, which has already been said in verse 8, that this beast is going to go into perdition, the 8th is going to go into perdition.
If we're saying that the 8th is alive, are we saying the 7th is dead?
No, I think it's the fact that the 8th shall ascend, and that there isn't an 8th. So it's just weighing. So there's only 7. So it's got to be one of the 7, because there aren't 8. But it's trying to link that 8th and make the beast itself one of the heads. So we don't know which one at this point, I suppose. But the logic is, I suppose, it is the 7th, because that's the last one, and it's going to rise up, and it's one of the 7 that's gone before. So if we just keep reading, I think it might become clearer, hopefully. And the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which has received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. So it says it's only going to continue a short space, and then it says that these 10 kings are going to receive power for an hour.
Are they going to receive power with the 8th?
1 hour for a short space with the 7th, but the 8th
Is of the 7th.
is of this, yeah, is of the 7. And I think there isn't, I think we just got to keep the factor that the 8th is a resurrected one of the 7. It's not an entity by itself. It's not a new entity past the 7.
I think
It's
the
one
same,
of the
you could
7.
say the same mindset, same ideology.
Same as it's immediately as one that's gone before, because it's a resurrection that's happened already. So it's not a real, it's just a repeat of something that's already gone. So there are only 7, but it's the same as something that's happened already.
The beast. It says power as kings 1 hour with the beast. So it's a beast. So it's an ideology, isn't it?
Yeah. So is this beast is,
Oh, the next verse tells us these have one mind and shall give the
so they receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. These have one mind and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. So they've got the same mindset or the same ideology as this beast, which is the 8, which is one of the 7. If that makes any sense. Okay, so these receive one mind with the power and strength unto the beast. These shall make war with the Lamb shall overcome them, for God is Lord of lords and King of kings, and they that are with God are called, chosen, and faithful. So now we have this hope in there that someone's going to do something about this problem. And we get the waters in 15. And then we hear that the 10 horns which shall sorest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire. So
Well,
ultimately,
the duped.
they're going to
The
turn this
duped.
deception. Yeah, they do. The deception is found out and they turn on the whore. And I think it's worth remembering. So when we saw, so then we said, okay, who are these 7 kings on this beast that have fallen? And there's one that is. And so you have to look at kingdoms that are in 1798. And I think Ellen White gives us commentary on this, so it's not that difficult. And we haven't got time to necessarily, I guess, go into all the history of that. But we said the 5 that are fallen are the same, repeating in large over here. So they're Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, pagan Rome, papal Rome. And that, even though in Daniel 2, we see this, it says the 4th kingdom shall be divided. So it calls all this one the 4th kingdom. There's only 4 in Daniel 2. But when we get to Daniel 7, you see that the 4th beast has these 2 phases, the 10 horns and the little horn. So you get more detail. So you can see that there's actually 2 phases of Rome and repeating in large, exactly. And then when you get to here, you see this daily and transgression of desolation. You see pagan Rome, papal Rome. And when you get here, so we're picking up that imagery and saying, okay, so there's these 2 phases, which now John is calling 5 kingdoms. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the reason why that one is fallen is when you line up Revelation 13. So this is a repeat and enlarge of 13. And we know in 13 is where this beast gets the deadly wound. So that links to 17, deadly wound, which Ellen White makes clear is 1798, and there's the time of the end. So we know the deadly wound is inflicted on the papacy, which takes that, which falls, the papacy falls there in that sense. But we know it doesn't cease to exist. It loses the state power. That's the bit we sort of see. So that this beast has received this deadly wound under the 5 heads. The other thing to bear in mind is that these 5s are progressive, these heads. So this is a time period. So at one point in time, the beast only has 1 head. So it has the 1st head, then it has the 2nd, then it has the 3rd. Sorry, do you have a question? Go on.
I was just going to say it's 1 minute. It's 12 now. Do you need more time?
Yes, probably only 15 minutes. I just want to wrap up this 5, 6, 7 pattern.
That's okay.
Is that right? If everyone's all right with that, so we can just hopefully that everyone can understand it. So when we see now the 6th coming into play, what Revelation 13 does is it gives us the 2 beasts. It gives us that progression from beast 1 to beast 2. So beast 1 has 7 heads and 10 horns, and it's this image. Then we get beast 2, which has the lamb-like horns and is going to speak as a dragon. So beast 2 now comes up here, and we see that we all agree that this is USA. Sorry, that deadly wound should probably go up there, actually. Sorry, it's in the wrong place. And get rid of it there, because this is America here. So 13 gives us that detail of how the end of the world is going to look with these kingdoms. It gives us papacy, or previous image of it, 7 heads, 10 horns, deadly wound on this phase of the beast. And then we get it speaking like a dragon and making this image. And this is the USA, this lamb-like beast. So now we see in 1798, Ellen White tells us the USA is coming to power. So this is the kingdom that is when John is standing in 1798. So they have Babylon, Medo, Persia, Greece, Rome. Papal Rome receives a deadly wound, so it's fallen. USA comes up 6th, and 7th is dragon. So this is when it's going to speak like a dragon. And we would depict this as well as the threefold union. So we've got the beast, the false prophet, and the dragon.
So it's still
From
the
16.
USA, but speaks like a dragon. It's still 6, but it speaks like a dragon, so it makes it 7.
So what Natalie's saying is it's still 6, but it speaks like a dragon, so that makes it 7. So this is that transition. And this is what we've been teaching in the movement for a long time, that the 6th transitions to the 7th, and it's still the USA. But we did say it was the foremost of the 10 kings. It's the leading the UN, that imagery. But I think we're moving into that position now. This is not the UN, this is America still speaking as a dragon. So it's the 2 phases of America, which are depicted here by the lamb-like horn and then the speaking of the dragon. And we see that imagery here. So then when you go to the ascends, we said that this is the resurrected papacy, because we said that papacy is the spirit of the, number 5 doesn't really die, it still exists. So 8 is the 5th, and it's ascending because it's got the deadly wound, it's fallen here, Papal Rome, and now it is not, but it's going to ascend again as a beast. So now you get papacy revisited, I guess, but we're not even going to say that's papacy now, because when it comes as the 8th, it's the spirit of the papacy, but it's Protestantism, it's apostate Protestantism. So this is really all, this last one is the same kingdom. This is the apostate Protestants, USA, and the dragon. I think it's all talking about the USA at the end of the world. And with the woman, I'm still questioning whether the woman sits on the head. When she gets to the 6th head, what does she do? So she sits on this head, then she hops to this one, then she hops to this one. So this is Babylon, Medo, Persia, Greece, Rome. Sorry, I guess pagan Rome, papal, that's PR for papal Rome. So she goes to this one, then she goes to this one, and then when this one gets that deadly wound, it's cut now. Does she go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7? Does she move to the 6th? And when we used to teach this, we said that's just a point in time, that deadly wound, and she does move to the 6th very quickly in 1844, because they reject the message. So they stay as apostate Protestants. Most of America stays as apostate Protestants, carrying the spirit of the papacy. So there might be a slight glitch there in time, but ultimately she does sit on that one. Or we could say she doesn't sit on that one, she skips to 7th, but she's definitely back sitting by 7, speaking as a dragon. But I think there's a case you could build that she's still sitting on 6, because Protestants have that first fall there. And we get that detail from our history, from the Millerite history, that it's a partial fall, that Babylon falls twice, that kind of whole thing about it being completely fallen. But the ethos or the ideology all the way through is this spirit of Godal and greatness, which we see now coming into the Trump era. And that's why it's I guess we can see that link between the ideology.
7 of the 8th.
7th is of the 8th, yeah. And now what's interesting too is now the whole beast is the 8th. So we would say one head at a time, and it's kind of depicted by having a head. But when it gets to the 7th, it's now the whole beast is the 8th. So this becomes the 8th, and it's kind of like the whole thing is now Babylon. It just seems to me like this. You get this division of the heads, and then you get the whole thing now. The beast is.
Wouldn't you have to
Babylon.
say then that the USA is the head of the whole nations, which would be the UN?
So Natalie's question is now, wouldn't you have to say that
Then
that America is the head of all the nations, which is the UN? But you wouldn't call it the UN though, because it's America that's speaking like a dragon. I don't think you'd call that the UN.
yeah, but it's the boss of the whole nation, all the heads, the kings.
It's the boss, just like Babylon, Medo, Persia, Greece, and Rome. Yeah. Go on, somebody's like Curtis.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you
Oh,
to
bless you.
repeat what you just said. You like what you said about the 7 heads and then the 8th being the whole thing, and linking that with Daniel. Could you repeat that?
Yes, I'm trying to. I only saw that today. I'm not sure. I'm just thinking about why, when this ascends, why does John now have to put that the 8th is the beast? Because up to this point, we've seen the beast and the heads as something separate in a way. So you've got this beast and it's got these 7 heads, and he's depicting the 2 separately almost. And when we go through it, we think, well, it has one head at a time. So it has this head, then it has this head, then it has this head. So in the sense, there's only one beast, you could say. But in the imagery, there's this beast with these heads, and it's kind of 2 separate things. But he pulls it together by saying the 8th is the beast. And it just feels a bit like how we make these divisions with Daniel 2, with the different kingdoms, but when we see that, Nebuchadnezzar puts this together, it is all Babylon still. So the whole image is Babylon, even though we've got those different divisions in it. And that's similar to what this is saying. We've got these divisions in it, but the whole thing is Babylon.
The plains of Shur is all the one image. Sunderland, it's all the one thing.
It's become, the Sunday Law, it's all Babylon. I just see there's some parallel there with the way it's depicted.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure what to do with that, but
Emma,
Curtis, yeah.
how I've understood the reason why it has different heads throughout history is because, as you're saying, there's an underlying ethos, but the woman, symbolically, sees kingdoms as ages go on that is going to achieve its purposes. So it's different manifestations of the same ideology. So as you were saying in Daniel 2 or whatever, not in Daniel 2 and 3, is that there's the same ideology that's manifested, but we'll say Satan needs a different commander for the kingdom that they're going to use because it stops fulfilling Satan's purposes. And so when you get to number 8, as you were saying, it's 8 in symbology because it's a resurrection of number 5, the beast that was. And so now the woman's going to get to a point in time where it's going to ride number 7, but that number 7 has the same spirit as all the other kingdoms. And when we say that it has all the spirit of all the other kingdoms, it's the spirit of the kingdoms that came before it. In Daniel 2, we wouldn't say that the Babylon, we wouldn't say all the other kingdoms in the world are also that kingdom. It's Babylon specifically that's being identified as the kingdom. So when we come to today, I don't think we can say, okay, because all the other kingdoms have the same spirit, then it must be all other nations. There has to be a specific kingdom that the woman is going to use and ride. And I guess that's to what Natalie was bringing out, that it says that the woman's going to ride all other heads, but just in like we would say with all the other kingdoms, it's not riding, in the time of Nebuchadnezzar, it's not riding Medo-Persia, it's not riding Greece, it's riding specifically Babylon.
Yeah.
And so today it's not going to ride Iran, it's not going to ride Australia, it's going to ride a specific nation because that nation is the nation that Satan's going to use for its purposes, whatever, however we want to phrase it.
Yeah. So when we don't really see, I don't know the symbology of the 10 kings. I suppose what we're saying that is, per se, that join with the beast, that give their power to this beast. I guess we could say it's the nations of the world. We don't know. I think we keep the UN out of it. I don't know if the UN is not everyone anyway, is it? Somewhere in the UN, some are not. Some are saying it's UN. I don't know. I just think it's important to recognise that beast.
How would they give their power to the
the
beast?
USA.
King nations, how?
How did the 10 kings give their power to the 8th beast?
And so we would need to identify who those 10 kings are. Is John making a specific point that it's numerically 10 kingdoms, or is he using it as a symbol? So in the same way where we read the 8th, is he using that numerically to say there's an 8th kingdom that comes after 7, or is he using that as a symbol so you can learn something from that symbol? So
I think we have license, absolutely, to say that. We know the symbol here was 10 horns, and we said it was literal horns, but even in that imagery you get 7, because 3 get plucked up for the little horn to rise up. So there aren't literally 10 from there on. So there's something about that imagery which is, I don't know what the 10 is showing us. We've got the 10 in 12, 13, 17. And we used to say it's the 10 regions of the world. It's split up into 10 regions, and it symbolizes the world, I guess, a confederacy. And then we used to use the imagery of Ahab ruling the 10 nations of Israel, saying he's the king of the 10 there, making America the former king of the whole world. So I don't know if 10 is the whole world, whether it's what it's a symbol of specifically, but there's something about other nations giving their power with this beast, the same ideology, the same mindset. So we know they're all in a confederacy of a similar ethos. You could say that, but I don't know exactly what we're going to say that is. And when that short space, that's my other question, is it continues for a short space, this seventh head, but does that start when it's in power now? Or do these 10 kings come after and join it for an hour? And the short space isn't the same as an hour. So you've got the short space, so the seventh kingdom comes into power here, and we say that this is the short space. And then there's 1 hour in that short space where the 10 kings come, or is the short space the same as the
I
1
like
hour?
it the way you've done it.
And then Emma,
Yeah.
in verse 12 and 11, and I guess how you drew it in your columns over there, is that this resurrected beast is not necessarily the same as the dragon. They're two different entities. And John's going to use the word beast and flip between different beasts. And I think we have to be aware of that it's not the same thing. It's two different things. So on the first row where you have shall ascend, John's going to describe that as a beast. And then in the second row, where you have dragon and etc., those are the ones that receive power 1 hour with the resurrected beast.
I wasn't seeing. Okay, so when I did this, I'm saying we're paralleling the heads with the beast. So we've got the 8th shall ascend, and we've got the 7th not yet come. So they're in the same position, and they're going to come, I would think, at the same time. So the 7th is the 8th, and which is a resurrection of the 5th. So the 8th is marking the 7th coming to power. So if the 7th is the 8th, are we saying the 7th is the 10 kings, or it's separate? I think this is still the same imagery. So this is the head on the beast. It's got the 7th head. It's the 8th, because the whole beast is the 8th, but it's the time of the 7th head. So this is what the 8th beast looks like. It's the 7th head in power, which has the 10 horns on it. So the 10 horns are still separate from the head in that sense. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 9, 10. So I don't know whether whether we're saying the dragon is the 7th head. When it's got the 7th head on it, it is the dragon now. Are we saying the 10 horns make it the dragon? Are we calling the 10 kings the dragon? Is the 7th plus the 10 kings the dragon? I mean, on one level, it's all dragon, but
It says the 10 kings.
but we know it's the 7th.
Give us the hour.
Speaks like a dragon. If we're going to say the 7th is USA, it's the USA that speaks like a dragon, and then the 10 kings join it, so they've got the same spirit as the dragon.
Sorry, I was talking about
I don't know if you're saying something different.
10
Sorry.
kings. I was talking about those 10 kings. If we just say they're the dragon, is different from the first row that you've brought up. So who's giving the power to that beast?
So if you're saying 10 kings of the dragon,
Yeah.
or they are on when they're on the 7th head, it all is the dragon. Are you saying the 7th head is the dragon though?
Yes. So number
And
7 equals
the
dragon.
7th is the dragon. Okay.
And those are just different symbols that it's going to use for the same thing. 10 kings, number 7, etc.
Right.
But
But
when it says that they give power to the beast, is which beast is getting power and which beast is giving power. So I'm separating those two. I mean, we could do a Bible study to define which are which, but I guess that's what I was pulling is, are we making them the same beast, a beast giving itself power, or are we separating them? And I think we can get clues from 13, where you have a beast, pagan Rome, that gives a beast power, papal Rome.
Where said the USA gives the power and seat.
yeah, the
the
USA
beast.
gives to the kings, to the beast. See, because if we're making the beast America,
Can't give power to itself.
Yeah, and that's what I was trying to allude to. Can't give
Yeah.
power to itself. So there's something happening there where there's
the ones
like
giving
you were
power to
saying in
the ones
that-
giving power are the 10 kings, aren't they? They shall have one mind who shall give their power and strength unto the beast. So the 10 kings are the people giving the power to the 8th beast or the 7th head, which is America. So they're going to give their power over and join it. Is that not how we? So it's not giving power to itself. I understood what you said about pagan Rome giving power to papal Rome and the seat and great authority and how that fits in. Okay, that's part 2 or part 3, maybe, because we're running out of time, or we'll run out of time. Does everybody understand the question or the point Chris
Yeah.
is making? So just Marshall,
do.
so Marshall's got
didn't.
your hand up. Go on.
Oh, I was just saying I didn't understand.
Oh, Blessing didn't understand. Okay.
Me too, Primrose. I wanted you to kind of like repeat it.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Marshall, is your question on this? Because Marshall's got his hand up. No, I don't know if his hand is up by accident. Marshall, are you there? Okay.
Hi, Emma.
Hi.
I had a different thought. I don't know if this will make sense.
Mhm. We'll tell you.
With Revelation 17, I had once seen a parallel with Revelation 1, Christ and the seven churches.
Mhm.
Just using the context of the great controversy. Are you frozen?
No, yeah, carry on.
Okay.
Well, I might
I
be for
hope you
don't
can
know.
still hear me because on my
I can hear
end,
you.
it's frozen.
Okay, I'm making right in the chat. We can hear you. Mhm.
Okay. So, what? Oh, okay. You can hear me. Okay. So, what I had seen is you have Christ with the seven churches. Then
Mhm.
Revelation 17, you have the woman with the riding a beast with seven heads.
Yeah.
Which is representative of Satan's kingdom. So within the context of the great controversy, then when you look at the last three churches, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea, there's a transition that takes place, and explaining it is quite complex. Because, for example, you have Laodicea in a time period where Laodicea is identified as the seventh church, but out of that church you have like an eighth church, but
Ephesus. Yeah.
yeah, you have Ephesus. It's
Yeah.
like an eighth church, but it's not technically the eighth in terms of the numbers. If
It's the first.
that makes sense. And you also have what was it? What was I thinking? Okay, then you have starters, those who are identified only in name. And I was I was thinking about this using the Millerite history, how that transition takes place between those people that accept the message and join the movement, and then they become part of
Church triumphant.
the Church Triumphant Philadelphia. But there are also those that are still in Sardis, and they're also Laodiceans at the very same time. So it's that complexity that is quite difficult to explain for now. But then when you come to Revelation 17, I think you then see a similar dynamic in that we're trying to understand how there are these seven heads, and Satan is trying to follow the same pattern that Christ follows. So when John uses the terms five are fallen, one is not yet, um, and then the seventh is not yet come, and then one shall ascend. There's a transition taking place in my mind, and explaining it, especially like with saying that the eighth is of the seven. it's like saying there's an eighth church, but it's not technically the eighth. It's still
One.
one of the seven churches. So that head, the eighth one, is still the same. It's like one of the heads. It's still one head, but explaining that transition is what is being brought to view in that vision. Sorry for not explaining it clearly, but I guess I hope people can get a bit of my thought process.
And it's quite interesting what you said, really, because we know the eighth is the first, which is Ephesus, and really the eighth is Babylon as well, which is quite interesting.
It's a parable.
We say it's papal Rome because that's the one that got the wound, so it's resurrected. But on one level, it's Babylon. We know it's Babylon, the first.
The eighth king of Babylon.
The eighth is the first. Babylon, and that echoes. I don't know the thought. I just lost it.
Revelation 18.
Revelation 18, yeah.
Babylon's fallen, it's fallen.
Yeah, and it's about to fall for the last time and go into perdition. So it's the judgments coming on the whole, which is the second angel's message. But no, there's something else I thought then. Babylon is the first. There's something Marshall said about the churches. I know that, of course, there's the 5th, 6th, 7th pattern as well with the churches, that they're kind of all in the same time period, which is what this is kind of depicting. If the 5th is the 8th, and it's 5th, 6th, 7th, it's all.
If Babylon's fallen there, so is the 7th church.
And the 5th and 7th are related.
On the 8th.
What's that? What did you say?
And the 7th church, if Babylon is fallen, which is of the 7th, of the 8th, sorry, so is the 7th fallen, the church, 7th church.
The 7th church,
which is of the
Babylon
8th
is fallen,
Ephesus.
which is the 8th. The whole thing's going to. It reminds me of the Revelation, Daniel 7, where it says that all of the beasts will live until the end as well. We know that they're all just like the amalgamate beast in Revelation 13. It's made up of all of them. There's something about the spirit of all of them which is existing still down to the end. I don't know where that comes in now. And they'll finally be destroyed in the lake of fire. Anyway, okay, we'll close that. Oh no, to the last point that people didn't understand. I think Blessing said he didn't understand what Curtis was saying. I'm not sure I understand either. I think Curtis is making a distinction, I think, between the 8th and whether that beast is distinct from the 10 kings and the 7th. I'm not sure what he's saying, Curtis.
Okay, let me try.
The dragon. Go on, try again.
In verse 8, we're told that there's a beast that was and is not and shall ascend.
Okay, so this verse 8, yeah.
Yeah. And then in verse 10, it talks about 5 are fallen, 1 is and not yet come.
Yeah.
And so in that middle column, the beast that is not, we recognize that it's not number 6. So there's a kingdom in that is, because it's ruling, which is number 6. And that's different from the is not, because it's dead at that point. Yeah?
Okay, so with the is not, so here the is USA because it exists, and the is not, we're going to say is papacy.
Yeah, or there's this, and then we're going to get to column number 3. In verse 11, we're going to learn more about this is not, which is a repeat and enlarge of verse 8. So it's going to talk again about the beast that was, is not, even he is the 8th. So that 8th is a symbol of resurrection, as you were pointing out. So it's shall ascend, yet is. Again, which is different from the story you're telling in verse 10. Yeah? Yes? Do you agree?
Yes.
Okay.
This is verse, what verse was that? This is still verse 10 here, but that's verse, what verse did you just give me? 18? No.
I just gave you verse 11.
11, sorry, okay, yeah.
And then you're going to get to verse 12, which is going to talk about the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings which have received no power as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. So when it says 1 hour with the beast, which beast is that referring to? And I'm going to make the suggestion that it's the beast that's going to be resurrected. So there's 2 different entities there. There's 10 kings and there's a beast.
Okay.
Yeah.
And confuse it with the dragon. What do we say? Okay, so
Before we get to dragon, because
to
we
that
don't
point.
read anything about dragon here.
No, that's why I'm just wanting Murray with to rub that off if it's confusing to people. Put dragon. Okay, so with that, then, are you saying that the
I'm not-
king?
Okay,
no.
wait. Before we
Oh.
get to what I just want to read what the verses are saying, and then we can make application or.
So, are we saying with the verses the 10 kings are on the seventh head, though? I guess we kind of always said that because it's got 7 heads and 10 horns, so it's somewhere.
Exclusive of what we've said in the past. I'm just trying to go through the verses and what they're saying.
Okay, so the verses aren't making go on.
Because if we can agree what the verses are saying, then we can go to the next step.
Yeah.
Okay.
10 rejoices with the 10 kings. So it doesn't say in verse 12 the 10 horns where they are. It just says they saw the 10 kings which have received no kingdom as yet. So they don't have a kingdom, but receive power as kings. So presume they get a kingdom by influence.
Yes.
With the beast. Okay.
Yes, in that third column. So it's in that third column that they're going to get power with the beast. Beast, which is the first row that you were talking about, that's now resurrected.
Beast 8, yeah. Get kingdom. Yeah.
And then it says in verse 13, who's giving power to this beast? It's the one that we mentioned in verse 12. These have one mind and shall give power and strength unto the beast. So it's 10 kings that's existing in column number 3.
And they give power to the
resurrected entity.
Yeah.
From before.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking at all these verses as a repeat and enlarge of each other.
Yes.
And so your 10 kings is going to be that number 7 in row 2 that's not yet come. And the resurrected entity is the first one that we spoke about, which is your beast that's resurrected. So it's this church-state relationship that we see over and over again. And why I have confidence in this model is because of Revelation 13, where you have pagan Rome and papal Rome. You have a state that's going to give power to papal Rome, and then you're going to have this church-state relationship. So if we want to describe it as you get the 10 kings as the state that I know it says beast, but that your woman is going to ride on. And I think that's what it's describing. But again, that's just how I've read it. I could be wrong.
So just a question there. So you've just said that beast in the first row is the religion part because we're saying it's papacy. It's the 8 that's going to reascend. It's the religious part of the state part, which is the 10 kings on the 7th head. And you're saying the 7th head is synonymous with 10 kings. It's 10 kings on the 7th because that's how it reads, I think. And the woman, so the woman now, what's she in that? So she's also depicting religion. Is she synonymous with beast? Why do we need the woman in that picture if we've got it all there with the beast and heads? So that's just a great, you might be able to answer that.
Which verse is the woman again?
The woman is sitting on the heads. I'm thinking, what does that add to it? It doesn't say much about the woman from here because he's just gone through the verses without the woman, but I've just gone back to the woman because we're going to go back to the woman in a minute. It says, the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore. Is that the same as hating the beast? And shall make her desolate and naked, shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire. For God has put it in their hearts to fulfill God's will, to agree and give their kingdom unto the beast until the words of God shall be fulfilled. So they get this kingdom, the 10 kings, and they give it to the beast, which doesn't, So the woman from the sword is that great city which reigneth over the kings of the earth. So she seems to be turned on and destroyed here. And what comes to mind is pagan Rome, is France putting the papacy on the world and taking it off, because I think we use that parallel. So France puts the papacy on, but in 1798 gives it the deadly wound. And America, I think we said, I don't know if this is correct though, we used to say America gives the 10 kings, or no, actually we used to say the papacy works with these 10 kings and then they turn and hate her. So I guess we're saying it's the 8th. That then the same kings that put her on the throne, so they'll come together and give power, will then turn on.
So the beast that, as you've described it, the state part that gives power to this thing that needs something to have power is, as you've described, going to turn on it at some point and recognize, actually, you're a bad rider. And the parable you gave was France, that France is going to be ridden by this church, and then it's going to recognize, actually, I don't want you here.
Yeah.
And so it's just this story that repeats over and over again.
Hmm.
Someone, I think Rose has her hand up.
Oh,
Oh,
sorry.
she put it down. Never mind.
Okay.
I had my hand up, but I'm still thinking, because when Curtis read the verses,
Hmm.
in the first row, Curtis left us saying that five have fallen.
Hmm.
Sorry to say, Curtis, we all do, yeah. Curtis is my friend. He will forgive me if I misuse his name.
Yeah.
So you left us with five have fallen. The five which have fallen is Babylon, Medo Persia, Greece, pagan Rome, papal Rome.
Mhm.
And then when we got to the second column, we had the is USA, but Curtis made us to add the is not as papacy. But what I wanted to say is what the is not is actually the state power of this entity, papal Rome. What was removed from it was the state power. So when we come here, that's why I was now thinking, what is he saying? Because when we come to the third column, he's saying the seventh kingdom is there, but the eighth shall be this papacy that is restored.
What? Okay, let me clarify what I am saying.
Okay.
Is that the is not is this church-state relationship.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah. So she change the, don't put papers, say church state, because what was removed was the church state, was the state part of this entity, papal Rome. You know,
And
it
that's
was
yeah.
it was church and state. So what was removed was its state power, and it just was left as a church. So when it is not, we don't have this combination of church and state.
But
Okay.
what is existing is number 6. So there's still a state that exists.
Which is 6, which is different from the model of
Yes,
is not.
of is not. That's the key point that I was trying to point out.
Okay, now I get you. Yes, I
The
get you.
nitty-gritties of all that wasn't really the point. It was
Okay.
this distinction.
Okay, I now understand that. Okay, so when on the second column, it's the state power that's there, but the church power is not there. And when we get to the third column, it's now both the church and state that's in the eighth beast. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, but 8th beast, not numerically 8th. I think John is just
Yeah.
as a symbol.
Not numerically, but okay. But we need to call it the eighth.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, to make the distinction. So the eighth is
Now this relationship is formed again.
So we
okay.
could put now, yeah, Ishar is now church and state. Is it? Church and state. From what Rose just said, she said the state part's taken away here. It's not, but now it's
Because
church
the
and
eighth
state.
needs a state to do its bidding.
If it's going to be like number 5, where it was a church state.
Yeah. That's the next question. How is it like number 5? Okay.
My question is, and how does that look today?
How does that look today? Now, we've not really made application too much of that, but that's for next time.
I really like this study because this is how I see it. Yeah.
Okay. Any questions? Oh no, Marshall's got a question.
Now more interesting. Okay, I think with what Curtis has just said, there's some clarity also in my mind. Because if we're going to say the 10 kings there are the ones that are going to give power to the eighth, and then that church and state relationship comes back. I've been having thoughts personally about, you remember when the third angel, when the midnight cry was presented, we had we were focused on the king of the south, World War II and everything. But in our time, we're asking about how things will look at the end of the world, and I'm now thinking, where are we in terms of World War One and the Third Diocesan Wars and the ascendancy of the papacy at the end of the world? Because I think that will be part of what will help us understand this.
Okay, so Marshall, over to you. Next study, you're going to do World War II and the World War to line it up with this. I think already we've got someone in the chat. We've got Blessing saying, I think I'm more confused than ever before. And Curtis, you'll have to save me out of this one. And then Manjit says, we used to teach that the 8th was the deadly wound healed being papacy, but it's not papacy. Yeah, and I was just wondering, are we saying, if we're saying the 6th is separate from this imagery of the beast, so that's church and state of papacy who's been wounded, and this is America, so it's two separate entities. We're saying the 8th is a separate entity from the 7th, and then are we saying the 10 kings is the 8th state part and is the 7th America? Is that what we're seeing there? Because these two are separate, the 8th and 7th, because I think I was amalgamating them, just saying.
Who's saying it's not papacy? Movement?
Manjit, who's it? But it's not papacy. 7th is the 10 kings. That's what Manjit's asking, I think, or saying. 7th is the 10 kings.
Or I used to teach
Yeah.
that the 7th head was the 10 kings, and we used to say that's the United Nations, or I used to say it's the United Nations.
Yeah.
And that the 8th was the deadly wound healed. That was the papacy coming back, and then you had 6, 7, and 8, which is then the 3 powers.
Yes.
So we used to say it's it's apostate Protestantism, then it's the dragon, the United Nations, and then
papacy.
the papacy
beast. Yeah, not the 5th. I think I did 5th, 6th, 7th.
I don't think that's the case anymore.
No.
What is it then?
So what are you saying?
Well, I'm not saying I'm not saying I know what it is, but it's not the papacy. I think papacy's out. I think we need to just we need to keep papacy out. So I'm wondering, how we had just thinking aloud now, but not just food for thought. We had the 4th, which was pagan Rome, and we had the 5th, which is papal Rome. And then you got 6, which is then America state. So maybe it's basically it's church and state in America being basically this apostate Protestant church and state, not papal church and state.
Yeah, I think that's correct.
Yeah, so I don't think it's papacy. It's all focused now is the USA
and the Protestant. So what's the 10 kings? Don't know.
The 10 kings has to be. The reason why we should call it the UN is because it has to be somehow all the kings of the world bowing to paganism.
I think that was predicated on the fact that we thought the mark of the beast was a worldwide test and that's going to go everywhere. I don't know. Go on.
Sorry, Emma, it's 22.
Yeah, we got to stop.
To be continued.
To be continued, yeah. And so thank you everyone for your participation. And hopefully it's given you food for thought to go away and look at it. I think we're realizing that we need to wrestle with this last part because this is our history. And obviously when it's present history, it's always the hardest. We don't have all the answers. And we're going back and looking at old studies and seeing how and there's a lot in there which is correct, I'm sure, but it's just that this final piece, how do we fit all that together with what's happening in our understanding currently?
I mean, the deadly wound was church and state separating. Therefore, the deadly wound healing has to be church and state coming back together. So 8 has to be church and state coming together, but it's not papacy. It has to do with the focus is now on America, what's going on in America. So
apostate Protestantism.
Yeah, apostate Protestantism. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm wondering
Sorry, everyone.
that's what it is.
Okay, we have to stop.
Sorry, stop.
Close with prayer. Dear loving God, we thank you for the discussion this morning. We thank you for stimulating our minds to remember what we've learned in the past, but also to be willing to change and grow in our understanding that we currently have. We pray that your Holy Spirit would continue to guide each one of us into all truth as you've promised and help us to wrestle with these things, that we come into harmony and that you would guide us as a movement to success. We thank you for this Sabbath day, and we pray that you would give each one a blessing. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you.